What's up, guys? We are back with another episode of the team mini-series that we are running. Today we are focusing on the New York Giants. From the NFC East, they finished third in the NFC East last year, behind the Eagles and the Cowboys, and ahead of the Washington Redskins. Going right into their quarterback, Daniel Jones. He enters his first full year, because last year Eli Manning started a few games. So his first full year,
Mm.
we saw a lot of good out of him last year. We also saw him turn the ball over quite a bit last year. But going into his first full year, I think that he could have about 3,400 yards, 62% completion percentage, 28 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. Um, he's pretty decent running the ball out of the quarterback position. So 310 yards on the ground for another three touchdowns there, putting him at about 324 fantasy points for the season. Behind him on the depth chart is Colt McCoy. So not really anything special there. If Daniel Jones goes down, I'm not really looking at picking up his replacement. Other than that, I mean, Daniel Jones is definitely a player that I'll be looking at and hopefully targeting late around like the Drew Lock area, especially because guys like Kyler Murray are jumping up draft boards. Deshaun Watson still exists, and he's going pretty early too after your Lamar Jacksons and Patrick Mahomes. So Daniel Jones is one of my under the radar guys, but he is getting a lot of hype and a lot of love. So he's slowly
Yeah.
creeping up too.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm worried about as well is all that hype that he's starting to receive. I mean, I do think taking Daniel Jones as your second quarterback has league winning potential. I mean, I mentioned it before. I think he can be a QB1. That offensive line, it's improved. They took Andrew Thomas in the draft. But when you look at the names along their offensive line, I mean, you expect them to perform better. They signed Nate Solder from the Patriots to a huge deal. He underwhelmed in year one.
Hmm.
Kevin Zettler from the Browns is going to be playing guard for him. You expect him to be better. So they do have solid players along the offensive line, but they really just underperform. So if those guys play up to their potential, you could be looking at a really nice offensive line. But Daniel Jones averaged the 15th most fantasy points last season, so he was already right there. The biggest thing that held him back last season were those turnovers. He only threw 12 interceptions, which is great for a rookie, but he lost 11 fumbles and he had 18 total. I mean, that's kind of unreal. So, I mean, just naturally, if he brings that fumble total down, he's going to move up a few notches for
Hmm.
me. And, he doesn't have a lot of pressure on him with Saquon being there. He can kind of just play his game. We'll see. I don't like Jason Garrett, but Jason Garrett's their offensive coordinator now. But we saw last season Dak threw for 4,900 yards with Jason Garrett there. So that's a system where quarterbacks have had success. So I like Daniel Jones a lot this year, and you already mentioned it, but he does have some ability to run the ball, and I would expect him to be somewhere between 300 and 350 as well.
Perfect. Now moving on to the position that they are excellent at, and that's the running back position. And you can't, when you talk about the running backs, you cannot not mention their star running back Sandro Platzgummer.
I was going to talk about Wayne Gallman.
Oh yeah, Wayne Gallman too. You just can't talk about the Giants without mentioning those two. But in all reality, Saquon Barkley, he's the heart and soul of that team. I mean, I personally have him as my number one in my rankings overall, ahead of Christian McCaffrey, and because I value running backs a lot, they're Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley are 2 and 1 respectively
Yep.
in my rankings. So I mean, we've seen he played a full season in his rookie year and had almost 2,000 yards total between rushing and receiving. Last year, he played in 13 games, and he came back from an injury that a lot of other players don't come back from as fast as what he did, and he came back and really didn't miss a beat. Um, there's a lot of times where I'm talking about, or you got a guy like Barkley, or you got a guy like Christian McCaffrey, or you got a guy, not anymore with Derrick Henry, but like Derrick Henry last year, where if they go down, you really don't want anything to do with who's behind them, and that's the same case here. I really don't want any shares of Deion Lewis or Wayne Gallman. If I'm a
Oh,
Barkley owner, I'm not even handcuffing him. It's if I lose Barkley, then I mean, it's not my whole season, but it's definitely a huge blow to my season. None of those guys are going to put up even half the production that Barkley does. But I mean, you might have different opinions on him, but I think that I mean, obviously Barkley is your number one, number two overall pick in all
Yep.
formats. Even in super flex leagues, you might take him over Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. But outside of him, I'm not touching any of the other running backs.
Yeah, I mean, starting off with Dion Lewis and his backups, I think everybody learned a very valuable lesson last year with Wayne Gallman. When Barkley went down, everybody was running to the waiver wire
Mm-hmm.
to get Wayne Gallman's production, and I think we saw just how talented Saquon is. I mean, to me, he's a generational talent. I won't go on and on about it. You already mentioned he only played 13 games last season. He was on pace for 1,800 yards if he played a full season. So he had over 2,000 in his rookie season. So I mean, he's a generational talent. You and I were talking about this before, but he's the kind of running back. He doesn't even need a great offensive line. I mean, he makes his own holes. He's just one of the most explosive and elusive running backs I've ever seen, and that we may see for a long time. So him and McCaffrey, for me, it's a coin flip either way. I don't think you can go wrong. I mean, I could see them being neck and neck point wise. So I don't think you can go wrong either way. And I don't really have much else to say. I mean, he's a surefire, top five running back if he plays all 16 games, and draft him with confidence.
Yeah, he's a generational talent, and that's exactly what you're getting out of him. Moving on to the wide receivers, they got a lot of guys that, well, not really a lot of guys. They got three guys that are all pretty similar to each other in the rankings, and that's Golden Tate, Darius Slayton, and Sterling Shepard. I mean, when those three are on the field, there's really nobody else outside of maybe, and we'll talk about Evan Ingram, that you're really trusting on that team as far as catching the ball. They got a lot of no names behind them on the depth chart, but between those three, it's like it really is a coin toss too. I mean, a lot of people have Darius Slayton up higher than the other two. A lot of people have Sterling Shepard up higher than the other two. Golden Tate's kind of sneaking in there a little bit, but if you're looking at anybody's rankings, whether it's ours individually, and I don't want to shout out any other websites or anything like that, but if you're looking at anybody else's rankings, you're going to see these guys within, I mean, no more than 10 spots of each other, and even two of them back to back.
Yeah, so I mean, it kind of depends on what your drafting style is. So for me, Golden Tate is a really safe pick. I mean, he's been known to eat up targets throughout the course of his career in Seattle and in Detroit. So he's very consistent. If you're looking for just a consistent PPR threat, I mean, Golden Tate's your guy. He's going to have, 80 plus targets. He does almost every single season. He didn't last year because he was suspended, but, he very consistently puts up solid PPR numbers. Same with Sterling Shepard. He's kind of been lost, I think, in the shuffle of all of this, but Sterling Shepard's also a very strong wide receiver, too, for that team. But for me personally, I love Darius Slayton. I love the connection that him and Daniel Jones built last season. And from weeks 10 to 17 last year, he was actually wide receiver 18. So he showed some great upside last year with Daniel Jones. And for me personally, when you get into those rounds, you're in 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right around the rounds they're going. It's all about upside for me. I mean, I can wait to take safe players later in the draft. I'm all about the upside. I think that's how you win a league, is by drafting guys with high upside. And if they don't turn out, you drop them and you pick someone up off the waiver wire. But I love high upside. But if you're looking for safety, I think Golden Tate's your guy.
And speaking of Golden Tate, he does have some punt return experience too. They also, I mean, Slayton has returned kicks and punts before. They got a couple defensive backs that can return kicks and punts. So, but Golden Tate, he's done it when he was in Philly. He did it in Detroit. He's done it a couple times with the Giants now. So, if you get points for that, then he's definitely a guy that might boost him up a little bit more. I mean, punt return touchdowns are a little few and far between nowadays with all the penalties and everything, but there's always that added bonus if he can return one back to the house.
Yep.
Moving on to the tight ends, two names really stick out to me. One is Evan Ingram with the first round tag on him. He's got all the potential in the world. Maybe another year with Daniel Jones will help him boost up and finally break out. And another one, Caden Smith. I mean, I only bring him up because last year I talked about him a lot, especially going into the draft, and I know like my team is Buffalo, and I thought that we needed a tight end, and Caden Smith was a guy that was on my list, and he really wasn't too much of anything even in college and his 1 year in the pros so far. But if he can make the team and be their second tight end there, he could be sneaky. I mean, especially if Evan Ingram struggles or goes down with injury. None of the other guys that are on their depth chart I'd really look into. But Ingram is obviously he's the top guy that you would want. He's the guy that I'd take him as like my tight end 8 through 10 if he's there. Really wouldn't reach on him, but going around there and being a guy that catches balls from Daniel Jones who likes to sling the ball, I like him there.
Yeah, I mean, I can't stress enough this season how deep the tight end position is. I mean, I've seen Evan Ingram go in the top six several times in mock drafts that I've done. And to me, that is absolute insanity because you can get a guy like Mike Gesicki, who I love, 6, 7 rounds later. There's no reason to take Evan Ingram that early. And I've said it several times, but I hate taking players at their peak. Because either, okay, maybe you take Evan Ingram as a sixth tight end off the board. I can't see him finishing above that. So either you're going to get what you paid for or he's going to disappoint you. For me, I want to take players that are going to outperform where I draft them. So, I mean, I really don't like taking Evan Ingram where he's going right now. And, I mean, he's starting to rack up quite the injury list. And these are injuries that are going to impact him long term. We talked about before, we don't like using the word injury prone, but there comes a point where some of these injuries are going to linger over the course of his career. I'm getting slightly worried that we're going to have to put him in a Jordan Reed category. And I loved Jordan Reed more than that. I mean, I took him until the day he retired because when Jordan Reed was on the field, he was so talented. And I fear that for Evan Ingram. And he's one of those rare tight ends. We talk about tight ends that don't really perform in their rookie season. I mean, he had a big rookie season. He had 722 yards and 6 touchdowns. I mean, that's a huge rookie season for a tight end. He was a top 10 guy very consistently that year. But if those injuries continue to pile up, that concerns me. And I really do not like his value at all right now.
All right. And then moving on to their kicker, Aldrich Roses. He's a good kicker. I like him. I like him even more this year than I did last year because I think that their offense can move the ball a little bit more, get in the field goal range, get the ball into the end zone. I mean, a point's a point. If they're scoring a bunch of touchdowns, you'd rather have your kicker kicking field goals, and there's other kickers out there that are going to be better than Aldrich Roses at, especially on offenses that are going to get him in the field goal range and not maybe get into the end zone. But I think that Roses he could be a top 12 guy on this offense and getting into field goal range.
Yeah, and yep, he's got a big leg, so he hits some big field goals, which equals more fantasy points. And I think the Giants' offense is going to be improved. And I don't know why this popped in my head, but one of the things I hate when people say that kicking stats are random. I don't know why that always bothers me, but when you really do research on kickers, you can find little advantages, whether it be where they're playing, the defense that they're playing against. You can dive into how the opposing defense's red zone defenses, if they really struggle, most likely the Giants are going to score more touchdowns instead of getting stopped for field goals. So there's little things like that. So, I'm in the minority, but I like kickers being in leagues because I think they offer a slight advantage if you're paying attention. And I mean, I'll pick up a different kicker every single week because I like to stream them and take advantage of little things like that. But I think Rosas is going to have some big games, especially when they're playing against some poor defenses. And I mean, I wouldn't necessarily draft him. I think he's more of he's probably outside my top 15, maybe right. If I ranked my kickers, I don't have it right in front of me, but he'd probably be around 16, 17 or so for me.
Got to rank your kickers.
Yeah.
And then on the defensive side of the ball, we referenced this when we talked about the Washington Redskins episode, that obviously the Redskins defense is probably the stronger defense in the division, and then the Giants could finish behind them in the standings because their defense isn't that great. And that's true. IDPs, Blake Martinez is a guy to really look out for. I think that he has the potential to be the top scoring IDP from this defense. Jabril Peppers, he came over in the Odell Beckham trade. He also happens to return a few kicks too, so you could get the double dip there. When it comes to defensive backs, it's strong safeties are the guys that I'm looking for. If you have to play a cornerback, then obviously go a different route. But Jabril Peppers being the strong safety, they have the most opportunities for tackles back there. So he's a guy, especially with the punt return tag on him too. He can definitely get you some points there. On the defensive front, they drafted Dexter Lawrence in the first round last year, who you don't really get a lot of points out of your defensive lineman, but he can. If you have to play a lineman, then he's definitely a guy to keep your eyes on. Leonard Williams from the Jets, he's another guy to keep your eyes on if you have to play a defensive lineman. Other than that, Xavier McKinney is a guy that actually he fell in the draft. We were doing our live show, and we were just wondering. We kept on sitting there wondering when is McKinney going to finally get taken? And now he's with the Giants, so he's another safety that I might look to grab from them too.
Yeah, I mean, you covered it pretty well, but their defensive front, I'm personally not touching them. I think they're a better real life defensive front than a fantasy. I mean, when you're looking at defensive linemen, you're looking at guys that are accumulating sacks. And Leonard Williams, Dexter Lawrence, Delvin Tomlinson, those are guys that are just good run stuffers. They're great in real life, but they're not necessarily great IDPs. Blake Martinez was second in the league in tackles last season. He's going to be a very strong linebacking IDP. Another name that could be under the radar, he's not going to be drafted, but their current strong inside linebacker, because they play a 3-4, is David Mayo. He's the same thing. He's a very strong run stuffer, so I could see him getting over 100 tackles under the radar, so I'd keep an eye out on him. I love Jabril Peppers. I think that he's going to be a guy that gets over 100 tackles this season. Last year, he didn't play a full year, but he was on pace for 110, which is really impressive for a safety. And he could finish as a top 5 defensive back for IDPs this season. Already mentioned Xavier McKinney. I think McKinney and Peppers could be a really dangerous safety duo. So I'm really excited to see them play with one another. And McKinney's a great IDP dynasty stash.
All right, so that about does it for the Giants. Final thoughts on them. I think that they have a little bit more talent than the Washington Redskins. Not enough talent really yet to make the playoffs unless the defense really comes around. Because I think they do have the talent on offense to put up some points, and that division really isn't that strong. I mean, they could probably split with the Redskins because the Redskins defense is going to keep them in a lot of games. I mean, the Eagles and the Cowboys on paper, they seem to be a lot better teams, which they might be, but those division games they're always iffy. So you never know who's going to come out on top. You get a lot of 17-10 games, especially games that end up. I mean, where New York's the home team, a Monday night or a Sunday night game, the crowd's into it. They could steal one of those games, and I don't see playoffs for them this year, but I see them finishing third in the East.
Yeah, and I already mentioned that defense scares me a little bit. Kind of the opposite of the Redskins. I really like the Redskins' young defense, and I really like the Giants' young offense. So I think that they'll finish neck and neck. I could go either way on that one. And we haven't really mentioned it yet, but they made probably the most questionable head coaching hire this offseason with Joe Judge. So I'm really interested to see what he can do. You know, he comes from Bill Belichick's coaching tree, which hasn't had a ton of success. I think Brian Flores is going to end up being the best coach to come from Bill Belichick's coaching tree. But I'm interested to see what Joe Judge can do with this team, and Jason Garrett's running the offense, which is intriguing. So we'll see how it goes. But this is a young team. I'd expect them to finish with no more than 6 or so wins.
There you have it. You got Joe Judge and Aaron Judge in the Big Apple.